Hello chess friends and welcome to your out of chat channel and welcome to an amazing game that I've prepared for you today. It's again a great game played by Stockfish against another top engine Eagle. This game is special as you'll see now the top engine Stockfish playing here with the black pieces, and we have the Petrov defense on the board. So the Petrov defense is really a decent opening. I think it's a very drawish opening sort of, and I think it's a decent response to e4. If you maybe want to study an opening against e4, the Petrov defense is perfectly fine. And I received recently a little bit of a criticism on my YouTube chess channel because many times we see maybe, I don't know, Stockfish playing against another top engine, and then Stockfish has a huge advantage in the beginning because the prearranged line was simply too strong for one engine, and then of course Stockfish brutalizes its opponent in an early stage of the game. Then we see some beautiful tactics, but now this game is really incredible as Stockfish had to play with the black pieces, and we have really a natural, a calm, a healthy opening, which I always like to say, really decent opening in which Stockfish creates really one of the wildest dynamics really all over the board. Because the Petrov defense, I think the most important problem of the Petrov defense for both sides, for white and for black, is that the pawn structure is simply too symmetrical. That's why the game most often ends in a draw. Here you see how Stockfish will create really some asymmetrical ideas, how Stockfish will create dynamics out of the seemingly static position. So that's why I love this game, and of course I decided to show this one because this is simply a beautiful game. So let's check out now the game. Here Eagle opened with the move e4. We have now the move e5, knight to f3. I found this game on the TCEC official website. I'll show you of course the TCEC official website in the description below, so you can maybe analyze also some other games for yourself. And now a tournament is played. I'll show you of course also the link to the tournament and also of course the PGen of the whole game. So let's check out now the game. After move knight to f3, we have now the Petrov defense. The Russian game is on the board. Here you see most of the times you see this continuation, knight takes e5. We have now d6, knight to f3, and here knight to e4. Here we have bishop to d3, which is now the so-called Millennium Attack, and the main idea about this Millennium Attack is to immediately challenge the knight in the center, and the most important thing is also to get the queen on e2. Then what we're trying to do is maybe to play c3, bishop to c2, or then d4, castling, then get of course somewhere the bishop here on a long diagonal. So I think it's a decent opening line, and it's also played very often in top grandmaster level. The main issue about this move bishop to d3 of this Millennium Attack is that of course you're standing, you bring your bishop in front of the pawn, you're standing in the way of the pawn on d2. Most of the times you're trying of course to develop the pawn on a natural move like d4, then of course maybe then afterwards to develop here the bishop on d3. But okay, here in the continuation Stockfish simply retreats with knight to f6. We have castling, and now we have bishop to e7. Now rook to e1. Here Stockfish is challenged immediately because Eagle's idea is now to play queen to e2. And what the cool part also about this game is that we'll witness now many theoretical novelties, which is I think very important for us. That's why I cover many of these games, because I want to see new ideas in particular openings, and you see exactly beautiful ideas here, especially in such a symmetrical game. As I said, here after move rook to e1, we have now the normal move here d5. Stockfish is of course trying to develop first the king by castling, securing the king, and then maybe even afterwards maneuver the bishop on a better square, of course, on the square d6. Here in the continuation we have now queen to e2. Eagle is not allowing here Stockfish to castle, because if castle immediately, then of course the bishop would be hanging. So here in the continuation we have now bishop to e6. If you try something like bishop to g4, you maybe can attack the knight like this. You can maybe challenge the knight and pin the knight on f3 here, but the main problem is I think that black gets challenged immediately with the move c3. Now in the continuation, after potential maybe knight to c6, we still can play something like bishop to b5, and if you try maybe to play queen to d7 in order to queenside castle, maybe then here with the h3, bishop to h5, again a similar idea will happen. I think now white is much better because suddenly this dark bishop is getting into the game. That's actually the main idea of the Millennium Attack, to somehow get the pawn structure in the center fixed by playing c3 and then afterwards d4. Now of course you see black is already in serious troubles, because here the main threat is of course bishop takes c6. After deflection queen to c6, you could lose again the bishop on e7. So the main issue of this particular position of this Millennium Attack is that the king is a little bit stuck in the center. So here after move queen to e2, that's why Stockfish cuts off now the connection of the e file, plays simply bishop to e6. But the main problem I think now about the bishop is that the bishop can be challenged challenged with the move knight to g5, and that's actually now the beauty of this particular game, because that's actually what Stockfish will allow here. Igel will challenge the bishop on e6 with knight to g5, but here Stockfish will play simply a beautiful gambit line, will sacrifice here the bishop after knight takes e6, and queen to e6 will sacrifice also the pawn, but in order to get a new initiative in the game. So really wild stuff. After move c3, you see this is now again Igel's preparation to play bishop to c2 and then d4. We have now castling, we have now knight to d4, or knight to g4 could be also an opportunity. Now the bishop gets challenged, and here Stockfish plays a beautiful idea, sacrifices simply the structure here around the square e6. We have knight takes e6, f takes e6, queen to e6, okay, a check, and after king to h8, we're stopping now and evaluating a little bit the position, because it seemed to me in the beginning that something went wrong here for Stockfish. Stockfish gave up the bishop pair in an early stage of the game, Stockfish gave up a pawn, but now you can witness a really beautiful attack by Stockfish, because the main issue, as we said, is that the bishop is standing in the way of this particular pawn on d2. You will be left, of course, now to play something like bishop to c2, then d4, then develop maybe the dark square bishop, then play maybe knight to d2, but it's simply too slow. Meanwhile, of course, black is doing something. Now Stockfish will play really an active game. After move rook to f1, we have knight to c6, simply developing further minor pieces. We have now this idea bishop to c2, trying of course to play finally the move d4, but Stockfish is not allowing of course this idea, plays d4 himself. Now the pawn structure again gets challenged, and we have now queen to f5, we have queen to e7, we have b4, bishop to d6. Of course we don't want to retreat to b6, because this diagonal is simply blocked out. Now by playing bishop to d6, you see the h2 is always a weakness here in the continuation of the game. And we should notice also one other thing now in the continuation of the game, that white is lacking in defenders when it comes to king security, because many times in front of the king you have maybe here piece knight on f3, or maybe you are having maybe here bishop on g3. At least you have one minor piece that protects the king. See now in this particular position there are only pawns in front of the king, so that's why this is now a huge problem. This is a monster bishop here on d6 aiming towards the h2 now, with ideas even to include somehow maybe the knight into the game. Knight on g4 maybe would be sort of an idea, maybe queen to h4, getting these three pieces active. Even this knight can come into the game, so you see these four pieces are storming towards white's king. Meanwhile, of course, black's rook on f8 is also doing something, so these five actually pieces are really wild and are attacking white's king. You see, although white is up a whole pawn and has the bishop pair on the board, but this is not a good bishop pair, because this bishop is blocked out. This knight hasn't participated in the game. You see the c3, the natural square for the knight is also taking, so far white is simply lacking in development. So I think it's a great compensation for this pawn that the Stockfish sacrificed in the beginning. The evaluation is about equal, but I think these are beautiful new ideas of the Petrov defense. I really enjoyed the game. So as I said, that's actually the point of this games, why I analyze so many of these top engine games. I received recently a little bit of criticism also about that. Why do you cover only engine games? Because of this, because theoretical novelties are there, because new ideas are there. This, for instance, position has never been reached in chess history, which is a beautiful position now, so dynamic out of the seemingly, as we said in the beginning, static position, because the Petrov defense is really one of the most positional openings that you can play. So really wild stuff already here in the continuation. Igel is trying now desperately to develop somewhere the minor pieces. After knight to a3, we have g6, further simply kicking away the queen. We have queen to g5, and now knight to d8. Of course, when we always watch now our pieces on the board, we are always evaluating the good piece and the bad piece. I think, as we said, these pieces are good. Knight on f6, bishop to d6, rook on f8, queen on e7 is also good. This knight needs improvement. Maybe also knight to e5 would be an idea, but probably because of this idea d takes e5, this couldn't be working. So that's why here knight to e8, with ideas to maneuver simply the knight on a new square, on a new active square on e6. So here in the continuation we have queen to h4, and again a beautiful idea here by Stockfish. Stockfish plays simply the move g5, because if you try now queen to g5, then you get simply knight to e6, attacking the queen. After queen to h4, you face now many tactical problems, I think, after this move. Rook to g8. This wasn't played in the game, but look at this setup now. This 5 pieces, this 2 centralized knight on e6 and then on f6, then the rook on g8, the queen on e7, the bishop on d6. I think in this particular case, white is simply tactically lost. So really wild dynamics all over the board. After the move here g5, in the continuation, Igel tried queen to d4. And okay, the idea is not so clear immediately why Stockfish is allowing here Igel to take another pawn, but actually after knight on e6, here the queen has, I think, only one good square, and it's the square c4. And the cool part about this tactical idea by Stockfish, which is real wild, that now the queen has taken a new square for the knight. The knight would love, of course, to come on the square c4. Again, the knight cannot come into the game on c4, so it was a beautiful idea here by Stockfish. You see now the queen is okay, it's centralized, but again the knight cannot come into the game, which is I think now the main idea of this Stockfish gambit line that Stockfish showed us here. In the continuation of the game, we have now knight on f4. You see the pieces are getting closer and closer to towards white's king. We have now bishop to d1, and here queen to e5. This bishop to on f1, it's of course a protective idea. It's not allowing here the knight to come on this very active square on g4. So pardon me. After move bishop to d1, we have queen to e5 with ideas to get the knight somewhere, maybe here knight on e2, and then queen takes h2 would be then a beautiful checkmate. So that's why here g3, and now again a great move here by Stockfish. Stockfish plays simply queen to f5, because when you are on the attacking side and when you get challenged, one of your main ideas has to be an attacking move. Most of us, I think, especially when you're maybe a beginner, most of us would simply retreat, but that's actually not the spirit of attacking chess. When you're on the attacking side, when you have already one piece on your opponent's side of the board, then it's actually time to stop. When you get challenged, don't retreat immediately. Your first idea in chess has to be, what kind of an attack can I make, what kind of a counter attack can I make? And here Stockfish, of course, the best attacker in the world, finds now a new counter attack sort of with queen to f5, because if you play g takes h4, then we can play simply queen to h3. You see, this is now already a wild position for white. Here in the continuation, you maybe have to play f3 just in order to also protect your g4 square. Now in the continuation, rook to e8. Pardon me, black would include now all of the pieces in the attack. That's actually possible because these pieces are not playing. So you see the knight on a3, the bishop on c1, the rook on a1 is not playing, so that's why here bishop to e2 could be an idea. But now after g takes f4, basically the game is over, because now the g file gets opened and the king is naked. You could maybe try here something like king to h8, king to h1 to escape from the g file, but now with the knight to h5, there's simply no counterplay here. As I said, white is simply tactically lost. So here the main threat would be, of course, here the move knight on g3. So that's why you see after move queen to f5, in the continuation knight on c2 was played by Igel. Igel is trying desperately again to find good squares. Now the main goal is, of course, to play knight to e3, which is a decent idea. At least this idea comes with a counterattack against the queen. But now here Stockfish simply includes all of the pieces again in the attack, which is also a very important principle in attacking chess. You cannot just attack with 2 or 3 pieces. You have to include all of your pieces in the attack, which is now a very nice element in chess. So when you're on the attacking side, as I said, don't retreat and include all of your pieces in the attack. So here knight on e3, we have queen to h3. Now the queen sneaks in, and now the main tactical threat is, of course, this idea: rook takes e3, and then after f takes e3 or d takes e3, queen to g3, queen to g2 would be, of course, a beautiful checkmate. So that's why bishop to f3 preventing this idea. We have rook to e5. What Stockfish is trying to do is, of course, here to play g4 and maybe then rook to h5, maneuvering the rook to the h file, and then of course attack the h2 pawn. So we have now rook to e1, we have now knight to g4, we have bishop to g4, and now queen to g4. Really wild stuff. You see there are now tactical ideas here on the e file. In the continuation, we have knight in g4, but now rook to e1. Beautiful queen sacrifice here by Stockfish, but it's of course only temporarily, because the queen has to cover this square is taking, but because the knight on f4 was standing here and protected the g2. Now in the continuation, we have after queen to f1, rook knight to h3, first deflecting the king a little bit from the defense of the queen, king to g2. Now we have rook to f1. After move king to f1, we have now h5, which is a great move because the knight was of course protecting the f2. Now in the continuation we have d3. Finally, Igel is trying to develop the dark square bishop, but it's a little bit too slow because here Stockfish simply takes out the knight and has now an extra piece, and of course now a completely winning endgame. If you try here maybe knight to e3 in order to stay with your knight on the board, then of course rook to f2, you have only one square, king to e1, and then rook to h2 is of course also winning. Again, the pieces are simply stuck, they are simply too passive. You still need many tempi just in order to get first your knight somewhere, then play d4, maybe develop the dark square bishop somewhere. It's, as I said, simply too slow. Meanwhile, white can be always challenged by this move rook to h1, which is of course very dangerous. So that's why here d3 was played by Igel. In the continuation we have h takes g4, we have bishop to e3. It's, as I said, simply too slow. This bishop came out too late into the game. We have king to g7, a4, king to g6. Now here Stockfish simply marched towards with the king towards the center, which is of course a very important idea when we have reached the endgame stage. In the continuation we have rook to h1, we have bishop to e5, we have d4, bishop to d6, c4, and now king to e4. We have rook to f1, we have knight on f4. Very nice move here by Stockfish. Now Stockfish connected two very mobile pawns. We have now c5, a counter attack here by Igel. We have bishop to e7, we have rook to g1. If you of course retreat, then it's not so good because this pawn is hanging always. That's the main issue. And then here these two pawns versus one pawn is also very dangerous. g3 would be then also a serious threat. This bishop will come into the game, so again white is simply tactically lost. So in the continuation, after move rook to g1, of course king to f5 here was played, king to bishop to d2. Now again this idea, rook to h2, we have bishop to e1. Now we have b takes c5, we have king to d3, rook to h3, first a check, we have king to c4, but now Stockfish simply takes, c takes d4, king to d4, and now rook to b3. This rook is coming behind the pawns, which is now the so-called Tarrasch rule. The Tarrasch rule says you should bring your rook behind your enemy's pawns when your opponent is advancing the pawns. Now again it forces sort of a passive move here by Igel. Here in the continuation we have bishop to d2. If you try of course king to c4, it's not so dangerous. I think we can simply play rook to b1. We're paralyzing a little bit the pieces here on the first rank. The bishop is stuck here, the rook is stuck there, so basically this rook is holding two pieces of white. So again I think it's a completely winning endgame because also bishop to b4 is now a serious threat. So here in the continuation after move rook to b3, we have bishop to d2. Stockfish simply takes another pawn. We have rook to c1, bishop to f6, first a check. We have now a6, rook to h1, we have rook to b2 attacking the bishop, we have king to d3, check, again rook to f3, we have bishop to e1, now rook to h3. Now of course Stockfish is hoping for trades of rooks, because if that happens then of course it's a completely winning endgame again with this extra pawn on the h file. In the continuation we have rook to f1, we have rook to a3, rook to h1, and now again the spinning idea. Very nice move here by Stockfish. Rook to a1, we have king to d3, bishop to g5, king to c4, rook to c1, the check. Now f3, we have king to d5, we have c5, king to c6, pushing the pawn further, c3, bishop to c3, and now this is game over. Rook to h1, bishop to d4, king to e5, we have bishop to b6. Now of course g3 here in this position. After f takes g3, we have bishop to e3, cutting off here the connection between this bishop and this square f2. We have bishop to e3, king to e3, g4, f2, here g5, rook to c1, the check, and here after rook king takes a6 in this position, Igel resigned. So beautiful attack. I think this was very interesting because we saw new ideas in the Petrov defense, really wild stuff. This gambit idea to give up the bishop in an early stage of the game for this pawn and then paralyzing the queen side was a beautiful idea, I think, by Stockfish. Here Stockfish also showed us the main principles of attacking chess, so never retreat, at least consider the option of a counter-attack, include all of your pieces in the attack, try to search for new squares on the board with your pieces, improve all of your minor pieces. I think this was a beautiful attacking game by Fish, and deserves of course to be on our list here of the best chess games played by top engine engine. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I think that Petrov defense players will enjoy this game for sure. We'll try probably some of these ideas. That's why, as I said, we're covering these beautiful games. If you want to see more brutal attacks like this and more positional brilliances like this, check out my commented chess games, play by computer series, with some more Stockfish, Alpha Zero, Lila Zero, and many more. And if you want to see humans battling it out in their best chess games, check out my commented chess games, the best chess games of all time series, with some great games from the past. And if you like this content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. See you soon with some more videos, and chess is the best, of course.